MCP. The first stage is just initialization, which is just connecting the client, which is the AI itself, to the server, which has the tools. The second phase is discovery and just understanding like, oh, what tools do you expose to the AI? What can it do? If it's like Blender, it might be creating 3D objects. If it's Notion, it could be creating tasks or something like that. And then the third is just using what it learned during the discovery phase to figure out what is the best tool for the job given its description. And then with all lifecycle functions or things, there's just a shutdown when the MCP server is done using, or when the client's done using the server. Just wanted to talk a little bit about some like examples of how I use it at my company. My company does product placement in video games, and a big part of that is the actual asset generation. So Brand Fusion AI is something I've been building for a pretty long time now, and it has a lot of bells and whistles in it. But one of the cooler things it can do is it can take brand logos and 3D game assets and then utilize Blender's MCP to generate branded 3D game assets that can be placed automatically in the game with no human intervention. And in the past, it's like you can't really tell like Claude or OpenAI to just like create a 3D asset. But if you give it access to an MCP, it can actually do some more complex, powerful stuff. Some other MCP servers that are really useful is like doing some SERPs type stuff with Brave, or you can actually interact with your file system, which is the demo I'm about to get into. Also just like if you want to do stuff with payments or Slack or Figma or Blender, a lot of really good options out there. Diving a little bit into the project itself, pretty much what it does is you just say, hey, I am interested in learning Rust, I'm interested in learning Golang, whatever, and it will use the tool files, the file system tools on your computer to actually generate a project code structure and all the different things that you need to use throughout the project. It also creates a couple of runnable code exercises, and also we'll do a little bit of like some web searching using Brave's MCP to figure out what are good resources I can do if I want to take it a little bit beyond what it just generated in like one shot. How this actually works is the user request, which I was doing through Claude Code in this instance because I connected my MCP to Claude Code, would be like, hey, can you please generate a bunch of Rust examples? From there, Claude Code will contact the MCP server. The MCP server has a couple of parts to it that essentially generates all the curriculum, and then from there, it also has access to the file system, and it knows to add the markdown and the code files to my computer itself, and I can start playing around with them. What these different parts look like is there's one portion of it that's like some handcrafted examples. I used some of the Golang and like Rust and Python things I did when I was like first learning those languages like 5, 6, or like 10 years ago, depending on the language, and included some of the examples in for that to kind of give the AI a basis template for what it should do when it's generating new things. And then from there, if you ever prompt it with a language that it hasn't used before, what you can do is just say like Kotlin or like Swift or something like that, and it'll look at the examples of the handcrafted templates to generate new ones. And then I just have like a generic fallback in case the API key fails or something goes on with like OpenAI itself. Gonna skip over this one actually, but an example for how it actually works and looks is, oh no, wrong thing. I'll zoom in a fair bit. But so how you can interact with MCPs in Claude Code is you can just do /MCP. And if you click on that, you can see just there's the learning path one set up. And then if you actually click into this, you can see the like view tool phase, which essentially happens during that like second stage of the life cycle. And the two things I have are either generating a learning path or just adding a lesson to it. And you can see it pretty much just works like a function signature, pretty simple, similar to like an open API spec or something like that, but just guides the LLM of like, here's the inputs I need to give to this tool, here's what the output I can expect from it, and stuff like that. And then it just takes a second to do, but I can do, I already did a Swift one, so I guess let's do like Rust. And when you call it, it'll then realize like, oh, there's a tool in my library that I should use. And then you can see the tool use here. It kind of calls this function using the parameters that the tool outlined itself. And then if you just let that run, it will go and create the Rust thing. This might take like a minute or two. So I will just finish off with the presentation. We'll come back to that in a second. But yeah, essentially what I just wanted to show here today was just MCPs can extend the abilities of the AI that you're using from just chatting to actual action. When you actually start introducing some of these different tools to AI, it becomes so much more powerful. I know we use it a ton at like Adrenaline, and I think it's something you guys should all really consider exploring. I'd also recommend some like lessons I learned a little bit of the expensive way, are just that like caching can be critical for some smaller tool calls, because if you're giving like an agent like free reign to call these tools whenever, it can end up in some like weird loops or some weird things, pretty similar to like how Cursor or any other like AI agent you're using can just end up in weird cycles. But really just moving forward, I recommend everyone checking out MCPs and trying to build something yourself. Also, I posted all of this info on our website itself and have some tutorial docs, so if you want to create the same project I built, you're able to just do that as well. But that's all I have for today, so thank you so much for listening. Yeah, I'll go back to that now. It looks like it is still generating. It sometimes can take long depending on the Wi-Fi and stuff like that. I have a Loom video I recorded earlier though. I can share that. Oh, sorry. Wait, I'm sorry. What, these links? Oh. Yes. So also now taking questions if anyone has any. What's up? Oh, good job, Reed.
So while using, thank you. Yeah. So while using MCPs, is there like an optimal amount of MCPs you use at a time without overloading the context of the session you're in? Like, do you have a sweet spot for the number of MCPs that you turn on at the same time that prevents you from overloading the context of the session you're in? That's one. And secondly, whenever you have multiple MCPs that serve, maybe you have two or more MCPs that serve like similar functionalities, do you find it useful to turn off maybe a couple of them and use just one to avoid confusing the model, basically? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think you hit on two great points there. So the first question, I would say like, it can be a little bit confusing in the context, and kind of how I'd think about it is like going back to like my first slide earlier is like, I'd think of these as HTTP calls. So like when your model is using an MCP, it really only pays attention to the input and the output, and it goes to an outside server to take those actions and stuff like that. Depending on the MCP and who developed it, it can sometimes give status updates, but it will not add to your context window a ton. So it can end up being a little bit more of a black box about what the actual work of the MCP is doing. So I'd say in instances like that, it's like not gonna add a ton of stuff to your context window, but that can sometimes work against you if it messes something up, then you don't get as much insight as to what's going wrong. So it's kind of just an outside service call that you don't have a ton of interaction with. And then as far as the second question, I think, yeah, just in general programming too, like I kind of follow that like advice that you kind of got to, which is like, if there's two similar tools that do something, but one of them seems to work a little bit better, oftentimes just doubling down with that one tool that works better for most cases, I found is like very successful for stuff I've been doing. There's like some MCPs I do that deal with like rasterizing like images and like kind of doing some like image editing stuff. And we were like deciding between 3 that performed well for different use cases. And by turning off 2 of them and just sticking with 1, we found our like performance increased by like 80% satisfaction with our clients. So it really did help by just like simplifying and like trying to really nail that like one use case. One more question. There you go.
Before I ask, I had a little bit of input on what you said. A friend of mine was working on a project, and when it got to around 25 MCP servers, it definitely got a little hairy. So if you're really getting into like 20s and stuff like that, it can get confusing. Definitely the context, even though each one is not super thick, it definitely adds up. And a quick hack kind of builds off the second point you said. If you have a lot of tool calls that are similar and often co-occur, you can kind of combine them into one MCP server that's more of like a workflow server. So it's tempting to just wrap an API with a single MCP server and let the model decide. But if things kind of happen in sequence and typical workflows, you can have your MCP be kind of like the input parameters would be like the config for that workflow, if that makes sense. So if you've got like research, then an email, or like research, then write an essay, then send an email, you can kind of wrap that into one server so that that kicks off. Yeah. Second question is, or my question, I guess, is security-wise, you said that your startup is deploying these. Have you ever noticed like an exploit? Are you ingesting external data?
Yes, and yes, we have noticed some exploits as well. I can tell you about them kind of in a little bit less of a public forum sometime. But yeah, there are some like issues with that. So I would say like with like MCPs in general, you can also find a bunch of other like resources online why there's a bunch of people who like kind of hate them right now, including some of the people who like were on the team that like made up the protocol itself. Can get into that in another talk at some point. But yeah, what I'd say is like using this for non-sensitive stuff is definitely like the best general use case right now. And I'd probably say that about just like all AI in general, unless you're running like a machine like, or the LLM like locally on your machine, probably don't share sensitive data with it. And then also your response to him was really smart. I like that. What's up? And, oh wait.
A really quick question. You talked about how your APIs tend to, expire or, are prone to updates as the LLM kind of updates itself. So how do you deal with that issue again? I remember you mentioning it.
Sorry, on what slide?
That's a good. It was this one, the one before, where you were mentioning that the API of the LLM tends to update or change, and that sometimes can disrupt your program.
I'm sorry, for some reason I'm blanking on that. Did you say it was on this slide, or?
To be honest,
Let's talk about it afterwards. We can sort through. Anyways, thank you guys so much, and hope you enjoyed the open hacking.
Is that the end of the programming? Wonderful. Last couple of things just from a housekeeping perspective here with Capital Factory. We'll wrap up at around 8. One more huge shout out if you haven't already had your picture taken at this event. Stella, our photographer, she's right over here. She's been doing some headshots for folks lately. If you need a great photographer, she's ours. She's Fiesta's. If you've ever come to that, please do. Thank you again to the Hack AI team. So thankful to have you in the community. And there's a QR code on the bartender's table over here. So make sure, again, just one more time before we break out into networking. Massive tips. They deserve it. We love them. The Humano tequila cocktails are fantastic. Thank you again for coming.